All right, let's just jump right into this explainer and explore the absolutely dramatic evolution of the Safavid Empire's military. We're going to trace an incredible historical journey today. Just imagine a cinematic timeline for a second. If you were to look at these soldiers right around the year 1501, you'd see fierce, tribal cavalrymen wearing traditional Persian clothing, turbans, carrying shields, bows, and swords. But then, as you move through the centuries, you'd watch them completely transform into a modernized, highly disciplined gunpowder powerhouse wearing standardized military uniforms. It is just a stunning visual and tactical evolution.
But before we get too deep into the weeds, I want you to consider this core mystery. How did a fierce traditional cavalry force, warriors who originally rode into battle relying entirely on spiritual devotion and swift horses, somehow manage to completely transform their identity to survive in a rapidly modernizing world? I mean, how do you take a society built entirely on the way of the sword and the bow and convince them to master the cannon and the musket?
Well, here is our roadmap to figure that out. We'll cover 1. Rise of the Qizilbash. 2. The Chalderan wake-up call. 3. The gunpowder transition. 4. Shah Abbas reforms the army. 5. Rise of the Ghulams. And finally, 6. A modern military legacy. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Rise of the Qizilbash, the Men of the Sword. We need to meet the unstoppable force that actually built the Safavid Empire around 1501. These were the Qizilbash, the literal Men of the Sword, and they formed the absolute backbone of early Safavid power.
And you know, things moved astonishingly fast for them. Look at this timeline. We go from Shah Ismail I uniting the empire in 1501 straight into a devastating military reality check just 13 years later, which then leads to urgent, sweeping military reforms launched towards the end of the century.
So, in the beginning, the military was highly decentralized. The empire didn't start off with a professional standing army like we'd picture today. Instead, they relied on a confederation of the 7 distinct Turkoman tribes you see listed here. They were organized under their own khans and fought as this incredibly rapid, lightly armored cavalry. They were absolute masters of the steppe warfare tradition. We're talking swift maneuvers, sudden brutal charges with lances, and deadly horse archery.
Now, you might be wondering about the name. Qizilbash literally translates to red heads. They got this name from their distinct crimson headgear, which featured exactly 12 pleats to symbolize the 12 Shia imams. And the crucial thing to understand here is their mindset. These nomadic warriors were fiercely devoted religious militants. In those early days, many of them actually charged into battle completely without armor. They were entirely confident that their semi-divine Shah would protect them from harm. It was this wild, potent mix of extreme religious fervor and top-tier martial skill.
But, as we'll see in Section 2, the Chalderan wake-up call, the myth of invincibility broken, pure fervor can really only take an army so far against advancing technology. The Safavids were about to hit a massive historical roadblock that would force an existential crisis on the entire empire.
This was the terrifying reality they suddenly faced. I mean, just picture it. Imagine being a lightly armored Safavid horseman, charging bravely across the battlefield, only to be met by the Ottoman Empire's army. An army that's heavily utilizing Janissary handgunners firing in coordinated volleys from behind wagon forts, all supported by devastating, thunderous field artillery.
And that nightmare scenario brings us to the year 1514. The disastrous Battle of Chalderan. The Ottoman cannons absolutely completely routed the traditional Safavid cavalry. It was a brutal, bloody demonstration that the myth of invincibility was officially broken. Religious devotion and brilliant horsemanship were simply no match for cast-iron cannons and matchlock muskets. The Safavids realized right then and there they had to adapt or their brand-new empire was going to be wiped off the map.
Which leads us right into Section 3. The gunpowder transition, reluctant modernization. Because this devastating defeat marked the beginning of a very slow, culturally painful transition period throughout the 16th century.
Following Chalderan, the Safavids did actually start adopting small units of artillery and musketeers. But there was a catch. The tribal Qizilbash heavily resisted using guns. Just look at this quote. To a proud nomadic horseman decked out in beautiful, colorful Persian armor, the bow and the sword were honorable. Standing in the dirt managing a heavy, smoking matchlock musket, that was viewed as static, dirty, and frankly, dishonorable. So for decades, the Safavid army was stuck as this awkward hybrid of traditional cavalry and a small, kind of neglected gunpowder infantry.
So how did they finally get past that? Well, let's look at Section 4. Shah Abbas reforms the army, the radical overhaul. To truly step into the 17th century, they needed Shah Abbas I. He realized that just buying new weapons wasn't enough. They needed to completely rewrite the empire's military DNA.
The scale of what Shah Abbas pulled off is just staggering. Take a look at this chart. He took the military from its roots, a relatively small tribal cavalry of about 7,000 men back in the early 1500s, and transformed it into a massive, state-paid, standing army. We're talking 40,000 disciplined infantrymen and a dedicated artillery corps of 12,000. This wasn't just a reform, it was a total structural revolution.
He completely restructured the forces into these highly specialized branches. You have the Tofangis, this massive force of matchlock musketeers, the Tupchis, operating up to 500 cannons. He expanded his elite royal bodyguards, the Kurchis, even brought in foreign experts, like the English Shirley brothers, to standardize their cannon foundries and ramp up firepower. Oh, and to maintain some of that crucial mobility, they utilized the Zanbarak. These were highly mobile swivel guns mounted directly onto camels. I mean, how clever is that?
But my absolute favorite addition has to be the Qizilbash. These guys were an elite unit of up to 2,000 soldiers handpicked from the regular army. Their muskets were so ridiculously massive that they literally had to be mounted on tripods just to fire them. They basically became walking artillery pieces. They also carried swords for close quarters combat, of course. But they perfectly represent this new era, right? Complex, heavy gunpowder infantry officially replacing the light, swift horsemen of the past.
Moving on to Section 5, Rise of the Ghulams, a shift in political power. Because building this massive new army created a huge political problem. The Shah needed a way to actually control the historically rebellious tribal chiefs.
Let's compare the two forces directly here. See, the old Qizilbash were loyal to their tribal khans first and the Shah second. That's dangerous. To fix this, Shah Abbas, building on the work of his predecessor Tahmasp, created a professional slave soldier corps known as the Ghulams. They were recruited primarily from Christian populations in the Caucasus, places like Georgia, Armenia, and Circassia. They were converted to Islam, trained with firearms, and most importantly, paid directly by the crown. By doing this, the Shah completely bypassed the unreliable Turkic tribes and built a professional army whose loyalty was tethered absolutely to him and him alone.
As you can see from the historical records on screen, the true genius of the Ghulam system was that these soldiers were completely free from the burden of kinship ties and clan loyalty. Since their entire status and livelihood depended solely on the Shah, they were deeply, unfailingly loyal. This allowed them to rise through a newly established merit-based hierarchy. Over time, these Ghulams became top provincial governors and commanding generals, which effectively sidelined the old tribal aristocracy entirely. A real game changer.
All right, let's wrap things up with Section 6, a modern military legacy, the Combined Arms Empire. This military transformation is what brings us into the early 18th century, where you'd finally see those late Safavid soldiers in highly standardized Persian military clothing drilling in unison with their muskets.
If you look at their tactical evolution, it really happens in 3 steps. They went from pure, nomadic shock cavalry tactics to a sort of clunky middle phase of relying on slow siege cannons, all the way to a highly sophisticated combined arms doctrine. By the 17th century, they were executing coordinated volleys of infantry fire alongside heavy artillery barrages, while their cavalry executed precise flanking maneuvers. This level of professional coordination is exactly what allowed them to reclaim vital territories like Baghdad from the Ottomans and securely lock down their eastern borders against the Uzbeks.
It really is an incredible story of adaptation. They saw the writing on the wall and completely reinvented themselves to stay alive. But I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. While that centralized Ghulam gunpowder army absolutely ensured the empire's survival for centuries and propelled them into the modern era, it also forever erased the fierce, mystical Qizilbash warrior culture that originally birthed the empire in the first place. So what is the true cost of survival? Think about that for a bit, and as always, keep exploring these fascinating layers of history.